त्यक्त्वा रूपमाद्यं प्रभवति जगतो अनेकदा अनुग्रहाय प्रक्षीणक्लेशराशिर्विषमविषधरो अनेकवक्त्रः सुभोगी सर्वज्ञानप्रसूतिर्भुजगपरिकरो प्रीतये यस्य नित्यं देवो हीशः सवो व्यात् सितविमलतनुर्योगदो योगयुक्तः योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं श्रीमते अनन्ताय नागराजाय नमो नमः अस्मदाचार्येभ्यः सर्वेभ्यो नमो नमः ओम। And gently let's open our eyes. So welcome to today's session of anatomy. What we will cover is two main topics, namely the nervous system and the endocrine system, and specifically on how the practices of yoga can improve the healthy functioning of these two aspects, nervous system and endocrine system. Last time we briefly touched upon the nervous system. You may recall the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the autonomous nervous system, and how some of the practices such as the Kapalabhati and practices such as Bhastrika, Ujjayi, Pranayama, they help with stimulating the vagus nerve. I hope everyone remembers that, right?
Yes.
Because the vagus nerve, along with the nerves of the sympathetic nervous system, they control the contraction and the dilation of the bronchial tube. So in relation to that, we discussed a little bit about the vagus nerve. So today, the main focus will be on the endocrine system. But before we get into that, we will cover the first segment, the first perhaps half an hour we will spend on the nervous system and how yoga can help. So let's begin with the nervous system. So what is the nervous system? We can think of the nervous system as wired communication channels. In other words, the nervous system helps to transmit messages. It helps to communicate from one part of the body to another. For example, to convey sensations when we touch something. Say we touch something hot, like a hot stove, and we want to react to it or respond to it. So the communication from the sensors, which are called the sensory nerves, they convey the message, they relay the message to the central nervous system. And we will see the exact definition of what is the central nervous system, what is the peripheral nervous system. So once this message is conveyed, then the body responds to the sensations, and the response is conveyed through a different set of neurons, namely the motor neurons. So you have sensory neurons to sense what is going on in the surroundings or what is going on inside the body as well, and the motor neurons that help to control some actions in the body. So the primary function of the nervous system is to transmit signals to and from different parts of the body in order to coordinate the motor functions and the sensory functions. And here you see the network of nerves. And I've read somewhere that if you arrange all the nerves together in a straight line, then it goes up and down from the earth to the moon multiple times. So it's huge network of nerves contained within this body, and it's incredible that such an exquisite mechanism is there within us to control how we respond to the surroundings. So the functional division, so how can we classify the nerves and how can we understand the functioning of the nerves? We can broadly classify the nervous system into two aspects. I hope you can see the slide, what is written on the blocks. So you have the nervous system, you can classify primarily into the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is basically all the neurons that are contained within the brain and the spinal cord. So this is the central nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is all the neurons that are connected to the extremities, and the primary function of the peripheral nervous system is to relay the communication from the extremities to the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system in turn can be further subdivided into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system is where we exercise our conscious control. For example, if you want to raise our arms when we do yoga, or when we want to use our limbs in our day-to-day activities, then the control, the conscious control, is carried out by the somatic nervous system. Whereas the autonomous nervous system, it conveys the messages to the body in order to do the involuntary functions. For example, the heartbeat and the digestive process and so forth. So a whole lot of involuntary activities that are happening inside the system is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. I think we saw some of this last time as well.
Yes.
The autonomic nervous system can further be subdivided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So in the sympathetic nervous system, it's the energizing part where it activates the body, it prepares the body for fight or flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the calming part of the nervous system that helps to relax and rejuvenate. So we have this balance between energy and relaxation. And later on, when we talk about how yoga can help with the healthy functioning of the nervous system, we will see how different methods of pranayama, they directly stimulate both sides of the autonomous nervous system. We can classify and go even deeper and talk about the motor nerves, which are called the efferent nerves. We already saw what the motor nerves are. They relay communication to the peripheral organs or the extremities in order to affect movement. Whereas the sensory or the afferent nerves, they help to communicate the sensations to the central nervous system. And there are some nerves that play both the roles, mixed nerves. They relay both sensory input as well as the motor output to the extremities. And then we have the enteric nervous system, which is actually a part of the autonomous nervous system that helps to control the gastrointestinal system. And this is also involuntary, so that's why it's classified under the autonomous nervous system. And you have another classification where the nerves that exit from the cranium are called the cranial nerves, and the nerves that exit from the spinal cord are the spinal nerves. So going back to this picture, when you look at the central nervous system, all the neurons in the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves that are actually connecting the central nervous system to the extremities. Now these peripheral nerves, they exit either from the cranium or from the spinal cord through the between the vertebrae. So they exit from the spinal cord, and each of these perform different functions. For example, reflex action. When we touch a hot stove and without a conscious control, we immediately remove the hand. So those type of motor control is affected by the spinal nerves, and the cranial nerves are engaged in a more voluntary or conscious type of activities. So this further subdivision, the cranial nerves and spinal nerves, we can classify in the nervous system. And here is even more complete classification that we can see in the nervous system. So the main thing to notice here is, so the communication from the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And here, yes, in this slide, you see both the form and the function. So the structure you see highlighted in yellow, and the function that it performs in green. And basically the central nervous system, the location is in the brain and the spinal cord, and it is integrative. It integrates the sensory inputs and the motor outputs. And the peripheral nervous system and how it's further subdivided into the sensory and the motor. And then you have the somatic and the autonomous nervous system, and which in turn you have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So this again a more complete picture of the classification that we already saw in the previous two slides. This is the diagram that depicts the parasympathetic nervous system. This is just for the sake of reference. And the interesting thing to note here is that most of the nerves in the parasympathetic nervous system are cranial nerves. And there's only one nerve that is a spinal nerve that comes out of the sacral region. Yes?
It's not readable actually.
Actually, we'll circulate this by email. This is just for a reference. We're not going to go in detail in this slide. And then you see this very long nerve, right? This is our famous vagus nerve that controls many of the vital organs. And then you have the sympathetic nervous system. And the main thing to note here is that most of the nerves are emerging from the thoracic segment of the spinal cord. Last time we saw how the Ujjayi breath helps to stimulate the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve, it passes through many vital organs. It also connects with the larynx and the pharynx. And by constricting the glottis, that's how we make the hissing sound when we do the Ujjayi breath. It helps to stimulate the vagus nerve, and which in turn controls the parasympathetic functioning of many of the vital organs. This we saw last time. Now we are going to see what are some of the other yoga practices that help with the nervous system. So let's see some of the practices, starting with the pranayama. In fact, the most effective method to stimulate the nerves is pranayama. We already saw the role of Ujjayi breathing. Now let's talk a little bit about the alternate nostril breathing. The left and right nostril, when we alternately close and open. All of us have done the alternate nostril breathing, right? It's called the Nadi Shodhana pranayama, or some schools call it the Anuloma Viloma pranayama. And there are variations. Surya Bhedana pranayama, Chandra Bhedana pranayama. You're familiar with those? Okay. So, depending on what is the mechanism or what is the order in which we open and close the nostrils, we can classify that as falling into various types of alternate nostril breathing, like Surya Bhedana pranayama, Chandra Bhedana, and Nadi Shodhana pranayama. The main mechanism of how this affects the nervous system, it's very interesting actually. The right hemisphere of the brain is intricately connected to the parasympathetic aspect of the nervous system. So the right hemisphere of the brain, which is responsible for creativity, and art, music, holistic thinking. So all this is connected to the right hemisphere of the brain, and it is primarily responsible for the parasympathetic aspect of the autonomous nervous system. The left hemisphere, on the other hand, as you know, it's responsible for logical thinking, analysis, and so forth. It controls mainly the sympathetic aspect of the autonomous nervous system. So the fight or flight is controlled by the left hemisphere, and the relaxation and rejuvenation is controlled by the right hemisphere of the brain. Now, the theory in yoga, now I didn't put this in the slide because the research on this is still ongoing. There are some papers that talk about it, but there is still some debate in the research community on whether this phenomenon is actually triggered by the alternate nostril breathing. But anyway, I'm submitting whatever I have read in some of the yoga literature written by yogis who are scientists, or yogis who have done experiments. You might have heard of the name Swami Kuvalayananda. So he started the Kaivalya Dham in Lonavala in Maharashtra in the year 1924. So he's one of the pioneers of research in yoga, and they have conducted multiple research studies, and even now they are very active. Lonavala, they have conferences every year, and so one of the things that they claim based on the studies is that by doing the alternate nostril breathing, we are actually controlling the opposite hemisphere of the brain. In other words, if you breathe predominantly through your left nostril, you are activating the right hemisphere of the brain, and vice versa. So if you breathe predominantly through the right nostril, then you are affecting or stimulating the left hemisphere of the brain. It's clear so far, right? Now, even when we are not doing the alternate nostril breathing, when we are doing regular breathing, like right now, if you check the breath, if you place the back of your palm just below the nostrils and see how much of the breath is flowing on both nostrils, you will discover that it is not 50-50. There is one nostril that is more dominant than the other. Do you agree with me?
Yes.
So one of the nostril is dominant, either the left nostril is dominant or the right nostril is dominant, and the non-dominant nostril is slightly blocked. That's why it is not the dominant nostril. Now, yogis who spend a lot of time listening to their body, because for us our awareness is outside, right? We rarely listen to the body. But when we listen to the body more, what we find is that the dominant nostril, it changes every 90 minutes to 2 hours. So if you check the dominant nostril after 2 hours, perhaps you will notice that the other nostril is now dominant. And throughout the course of the day, this dominant nostril, it keeps alternating. So for some time, right nostril is dominant, and then after 2 hours, left nostril is dominant, and then this rhythm takes place throughout the course of the day and in the night. What does it mean? For example, if the right nostril is dominant right now, then the left hemisphere of the brain is more active. The opposite hemisphere is more active. So the mind is now more prepared to do some analysis work. In other words, there is more energy in the system to carry out tasks that require focus. On the other hand, when the left nostril is dominant, then the right hemisphere of the brain is stimulated, which means more creative thinking or holistic thinking, where you don't need to focus, but for example, to create a poem, you need to be in a relaxed state of mind. Or to compose music, you need to be in a relaxed state of mind. So that is what is facilitated when the right hemisphere is dominant, when the right hemisphere is activated. It's clear so far, right? So the alternate rhythm between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic aspect of the nervous system takes place through this alternate dominance of the nostrils. That's a whole branch of yoga called Swara Yoga. How many of us have heard of this term? Swara Yoga. So Swara Yoga, the whole subject of Swara Yoga is how to control this rhythm of dominant nostrils. It's a fascinating science. It's an incredible science. And let me give some examples of how this is so fascinating. It says, for example, the primary text that talk about Swara Yoga is called Shiva Swarodaya. Shiva Swarodaya. And this is one of the classic texts in Sanskrit, which gives the teachings of Swara Yoga in the form of a dialogue between Shiva and Parvati. So, and you can find this text available. Especially there's a book called Swara Yoga, published by Bihar School of Yoga, where you see the teachings given in the system called the Swara Yoga. One of the things it says, consume food only when the right nostril is dominant. Consume food only when the right nostril is dominant. Drink water only when the left nostril is dominant. So like that, different activities, different day-to-day activities, it gives recommendations, it gives procedures of how to check whether the body is ready to do that activity. So to consume food, we need the metabolism to be functioning in a higher form. There needs to be more energy in the system. So the sympathetic aspect of the nervous system should be triggered. So the right nostril should be more dominant. Yeah.
Can we activate the nostril?
We'll come to that.
Okay.
That's a good point, right? For example, we go to a party, there's a nice buffet in front of us. Unfortunately, if the left nostril is dominant, then what do, right? You can't tell the host, okay, wait for 2 hours, I want my nostril dominance to shift. It's not going to work. So, yes, Shiva Swarodaya, that text, it also talks about how to deliberately change the dominant nostril. There are marma points. There are special points in the body where when we touch, or yogis can also use their awareness to activate those marma points which change the dominant nostril. It's very fascinating, right? And so it's a whole amazing science that talk about this dominant nostrils. Now, what is the role of alternate nostril breathing? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to equalize both nostrils so that it's 50-50? Answer is it's not. We are not trying to make it 50-50. What we are trying to do is to unclog both nostrils so that this natural rhythm between the left and right nostril dominance can take place unhindered. You see the point, right? For example, if the left nostril is blocked, that means when the opportunity for the left nostril to become dominant happens, then it's not able to perform its job fully or efficiently. You see the point, right? So when it is blocked, then you don't want the left nostril dominance to be interfered with the blockage in that nostril. So by doing the Nadi Shodhana literally means cleansing the nadis. We are cleansing all the blocks in the nadis so that this dominance, the alternate dominance of left and right nostril can take place unhindered. It is said that Ayurvedic physicians, so Ayurveda and yoga are sister sciences. They had a parallel stream of evolution. Ayurvedic physicians, one of the methods they use in diagnosis is to check this alternate dominance. If they find, for example, that one of the nostril is dominant for more than 2 hours or more than 50% of the time, if one of the nostril is dominant much more than the other, then they can predict that, oh, there is some seed of disharmony here which may manifest after 6 months into the body in the form of an ailment. So they can actually predict the onset of, for example, diabetes. If the left nostril is dominant more of the time than the right nostril, then they can say, oh, if we don't attend to it, then after 6 months, it might show up in the body as diabetes. So these are some of the ways in which Ayurvedic physicians use for diagnosing future ailments before they arise in the body. So in the subtle form, it already exists and it can show up in the body. So this is one example of how we can use the alternate nostril dominance. And now with the practice of alternate nostril breathing, we cleanse both sides, both nadis, the parasympathetic and sympathetic aspect of the nervous system, so that the natural balance takes place. Yes.
So if one of the nostrils is sort of blocked, so then does that mean, so then it continues, so let's say my right was dominant and now it's time for it to shift and it found that the left is blocked, so it continues from the right.
Exactly. So imagine what happens when one of the nostril takes over. Say if the right nostril is dominant for more than 50% of the time. So they need to take turns, right? But if they find that the other nostril is blocked, that means right nostril is the energizing nostril. So if there is more energy and less of relaxation, then it can show up in the body. So more irritable or more angry in the level of the mind or the level of the body. It can show up as high blood pressure and so forth. On the other hand, if the left nostril is dominant for more than 50% of the time, then there is more relaxation that happens, not sufficient energy. That means during the course of the day, they might feel lethargic. So if going to work and they are sitting in their desk, they want to work but their mind says no, they want to switch off. So the lack of energy or lack of vitality during the course of the day could be because the left nostril is more dominant than the right for more than 50% of the time. So alternate nostril breathing ensures that both sides are clean, in other words free of any obstruction, so that this natural rhythm can take place. And my teacher used to explain to me how the mechanism of alternate nostril breathing works. If you think of two long pipes carrying water from one side to the other. Now, if one of the pipes is blocked, you won't know it immediately because you still see water coming out on the other side. Now, how would you find out that one pipe is blocked? Exactly, block the other one. In other words, alternately open and close on the output side. You just close one of the pipes, see whether water is coming out from the other pipe. If it does not come out, that means it's blocked. That's exactly what we do in the alternate nostril breathing. When we block one nostril, if the other network of nadis is blocked, then by deliberately breathing through the nostril, we are clearing out any blocks. That's the mechanism of the alternate nostril breathing. Nadi Shodhana. It clears the obstructions in the nadis. It makes sense, right? So just like you have arteries and nerves in the blood vessels, you have this system of nadis, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic aspect of the nervous system. And we clear them of any obstruction by engaging the left and right nostrils. So that is the mechanism that we can think of when talking about the alternate nostril breathing.
So what is the purpose of holding the breath sometimes?
Holding the breath, in fact we are going to talk about kumbhaka or holding the breath in a separate session when we talk about the mechanics of breathing. And briefly, when we hold breath, what happens is we are allowing the pressure to accumulate inside the lungs, which enables a more efficient exchange of oxygen. So it helps for the chemical process of assimilating that oxygen into the alveoli. So we are retaining that pressure for a little longer, and we will talk about that in the session on breathing. Yes.
So when you say nadi, so like when we take pulse, it's called nadi. So I sometimes it's like, do you use it interchangeably like nerves and arteries and veins?
Yes. In fact, the Sanskrit word nadi literally means a tube. It could mean a blood vessel. It could mean the nadis that are in the subtle body that carry prana. It could also mean the nerves. So all three, we can technically use the word nadi. The word nadi comes from another word, nadi. Nadi means river. So something that, a channel that carries water or carries a flow of something. That is nadi. So nadi and nadi, they come from the same root. Yes.
What are some obstructions? Like what's actually obstructing the nerve?
What's obstructing the nadis? That could be multiple things. For example, when we are stressed and involuntarily we constrict the muscles, then that contraction of the muscle, last time we saw that the contraction of the muscles helps to bring the venous return of the blood back to the heart. But if it is taken to the extreme, then we are actually squeezing the nadis, we are not allowing the proper flow of the fluids or proper flow of the prana through the channels. In other words, it could be blocked because of like a psychosomatic. It starts from the mind and it reflects in the body. It impinges. For example, one of the ways is impinging the nerve. And this is one mechanism we are going to see later. When we talk about the spine, we will see that the nerves can get impinged and the signals cannot be communicated properly. That is one way in which it's blocked. That's one example where the nerves, the nadis, the nerves are blocked. And a physical example of a block would be like in the blood vessel, when there is blocks due to the cholesterol, accumulation of cholesterol around the walls of the blood vessel. That is another block. So anything that obstructs the flow. Yes.
So going back to our earlier suggestion that sometimes alternate nostril breathing will clear the temporary blockage in the other nostril. Basically, it could be a mucus or it could be temporary allergy. But if there is a reason for a inflammation or because some imbalance, if there is a blockage, we don't want to continue to do the alternate nostril for extended period of time, right? Because that will create imbalance in the or lack of oxygen to the body because you are not getting enough oxygen through other nostrils.
So
right?
That's right. In fact, alternate nostril is one mechanism to clear that. But in order to attend to the root cause,
Yeah.
there could be other things that will help. For example, last time we saw the contraction and the dilation of the bronchial aspect, right? Now that is controlled by the vagus nerve. So stimulating the vagus nerve is going to help with that. It's going to facilitate the proper rhythm of the contraction and dilation that matches with the rhythm of our breathing. So in fact, this brings a very good point. You know, as yoga teachers, many people will come to us and say, I have ailment A. Please tell me some practice that I can do on a daily basis so that I can experience some relief. Perhaps they would say, oh, I have diabetes. Oh, I have lower back pain. Please give me an asana or two asanas. And sometimes we are tempted to give. So we go to an anatomy class and we study that this posture is good for experiencing relief from this ailment. Now, if we give them just one posture, okay, so for example, later we are going to see for diabetes, one of the best postures that we can do is spinal twists. If we tell them, okay, do a seated spinal twist, you know what's going to happen? They will do only that posture because they will dedicate 5 minutes perhaps from their busy schedule. They will dedicate some time and do just that one posture. It is good, it's better than not doing at all, but it is just placing a band-aid on that problem. It doesn't attend to the root cause because the root cause of that problem could be hiding elsewhere in the system. That is why my teacher recommends that whatever the condition is, whatever the ailment is, the first recommendation should be do a holistic sequence of practice. Do a well-rounded sequence of practice that attends to all parts of the body. An example of a well-rounded sequence of postures is Surya Namaskar. Surya Namaskar is one practice that exercises all the major muscles, all the major joints, all the major internal organs. That is an example of a well-rounded practice. So you could say, perhaps you could do 12 rounds of Surya Namaskar and then the spinal twist. So give them a holistic practice, a well-rounded practice, and then give emphasis on a few of the postures. You could do this, more emphasis on spinal twist, or more emphasis on forward bending posture, or more emphasis on standing postures, or postures that bring stability, so forth. But the main thing is to give importance to the well-rounded sequence of postures. It makes sense, right? Let me give an example. A couple of years back, there was a research study that was presented in the Newsweek magazine. So what they discovered was about lower back pain, the top 6 causes of lower back pain. The cause number 1 was people were overweight. So when the body is overweight, then the lower back cannot handle that excess weight, so you find the discomfort in the lower back. Now imagine what happens if they attend only to the lower back. They need to attend to the root cause, right? So in addition to attending to the lower back directly, they need to do practices in order to perhaps burn the calories, or we are going to see some other ways here to help with managing the body weight. That's going to help bring relief as well. So attend to the root cause. And that was the cause number 1, the most often why people experience lower back pain. And number 2 was people were stressed. So stress in the mind reflects in the body, and for many people it reflects in the lower back. So rather than just attending to the lower back by targeting yoga postures for it, they can also perhaps include meditation. They can calm the mind so that they relieve the stress by inner practices. That's going to help relieve the lower back pain. So I'm just mentioning this because we don't know where the root cause is hiding. So it's better to do a well-rounded sequence of practice and then a few postures or few practices that directly deal with that symptom that we are experiencing. So that was about alternate nostril breathing. A couple of more interesting points about the alternate nostril breathing. Now, when we come out of the final relaxation in Shavasana, I think we roll over to the right side, right? The reason why we roll over to the right side is directly related to this phenomenon of alternate nostril breathing. So what happens when we turn to our right is the blocks in the nostril, gravity pulls the blocks into the right nostril, it opens the left nostril up first. Opening the left nostril, which is the calming nostril. So in Sanskrit, in the yogic parlance, it is called Ida and the Pingala. Ida is the left nostril, Pingala is the right nostril. Also called the Chandra Nadi and the Surya Nadi. So when we roll over to our right, the left nostril opens up first. It becomes the dominant nostril because of gravity. And the left nostril is the calming nostril. So when we come out of the final relaxation, we come out of it slowly in an unhurried manner. Now the same thing can be used in the other side. For example, just before we go to sleep at night, say we just went to a party and we had a sumptuous dinner, delicious, nutritious and sumptuous dinner. And we filled 110% of our tummy. And immediately we go to sleep. It's not recommended to do it, but suppose this happens. Then it is wise to roll over to our left. Turn to the left and lie down, because it opens up the right nostril, which is the energizing nostril. And there is still energy to activate the metabolic processes. The digestion can still go on, and the digestion is not lethargic. It's interesting, right? And if you are curious more, you can read the Shiva Swarodaya text. And then we have practices. Yes.
So you were talking about the ongoing research about the right activates the left, and what do the ancient texts say about that?
It's exactly whatever we spoke about is from that text, Shiva Swarodaya.
So it does say the alternate. Ancient.
Exactly. And it goes into much more detail, very fascinating aspects. Yeah.
So usually even in the nights when we sleep, so some people like sleep on the left or the right, so does it balance the system because we keep moving, right? So
Yeah, if it's involuntary, that is without conscious or deliberate intent, we just toss and turn during the night, that's okay. But the moment we lie down, then we can choose to either lie on our right or our left based on what we did during the day. So if we just had a heavy meal, it's better to lie down on our left side.
so if you continue to lie down on the left, the left will
The right nostril.
yeah, the right will be continue to dominate throughout
Yes.
the time we sleep in that position.
No. We are just facilitating the right nostril.
Oh.
But even when we continue to be on the left side for several hours, the dominant nostril will change. So that's just a way to shift the focus towards the right nostril. Yeah.
So when you say because alternate nostril breathing clears the blocks, so one of the blocks is the nasal kind of blocks, like the other blocks we also say is like even the blocks on the like cholesterol kind of blocks. Is that also the certain effects of that?
Cholesterol on the blood vessels.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of that. Of course, here we are talking about the nasal passage and the mucus, the blocks because of that. But the effect of pranayama on the blood vessels, of course, last time we saw the venous return of the blood, it makes the stroke volume higher. So perhaps that helps with removing some of the blocks inside the blood vessels. But whether it is significant or whether it can remove the added cholesterol or whether we can take liberty to consume more cholesterol food, I don't know about that. Okay. And then the next one is the Brahmari. All of us have practiced Brahmari, right? So where we use the sound of the bumblebee, humming sound, or even any chanting. And the way it helps with the nervous system is the voice box, as we saw before. The vagus nerve, it connects the pharynx and the larynx as well. So we are directly stimulating the voice box and the vagus nerve by introducing sound. And my teacher also used to give an analogy of how sound helps in yoga, because sound has a very special place in yoga in the form of mantras, and the chanting of the mantras is a very powerful practice. There's a whole mantra yoga on it. And how are sounds very powerful? Why do we use them? And to understand that, he used to give a metaphor. Imagine a jar of sand. Imagine a jar of sand, and if the surface of the sand is uneven, you have ups and downs on the surface of the sand. What would you do to level the surface of the sand?
Shake it.
You would shake it. You would offer vibrations. Same thing we are doing here. When we offer vibrations with sound, then the ups and downs, in other words, when the mind is fluctuating or the nerves are fluctuating from the extremes, in the yogic parlance, it's called the dvandva. Dvandva. Patanjali talks about dvandva. Tato dvandvana vigataha. That's a sutra. Dvandvas are the extremities. When the nerves are going from one extreme to another, they're agitated, then to bring equanimous aspect to the nerves, samatvam, when we want equilibrium, then shake them. In other words, offer vibration, and just like how the sand settles down, it becomes level, the surface of the sand becomes level. The sound has a similar effect on our nerve. So there is more balance in the system. So that's how the sound works to help with the nervous system. And then practices such as the Bastrika and any practice where we change the rhythm of the breath, even Kapalabhati. they help to activate either the sympathetic or the parasympathetic aspect of the nervous system. And then we have other practices that go beyond the pranayama. I mentioned pratyahara and dhyana here. So, of course, these are all from the 8 limbs of yoga. Pranayama is the 4th limb of Ashtanga yoga. Pratyahara is the 5th limb, and dhyana is the 7th limb of the Ashtanga yoga. Pratyahara, this practice of Shanmukhi mudra, where we close the 5 senses so that we shut off the gates to the outside world. So that in that moment of our practice, we are not allowing any sensory inputs. Then it helps to relax the nervous system, because most of our waking time, we are constantly bombarded by sensory inputs. You agree with me, right? Especially in this day and age, we have lots of gadgets and gizmos that constantly remind us that they are there. So you hear a beep or a vibration, or you hear some flash, or you see some flash on the screen, and suddenly you check, oh, who is emailing me? There is so much of sensory inputs. My teacher used to call all these gadgets and gizmos WMD, weapons of mass distraction. WMD, constantly being bombarded by sounds and sensory inputs. So for a few moments, shutting off all this helps to calm the nerves. Especially, we saw there are 2 types of nerves, the motor nerves and the sensory nerves. So this helps to give rest to the sensory nerves. And then dhyana goes one step further. Not only do we block the senses, we are also allowing the mind to go to a place of tranquility. Meditation is nothing but the movement from turbulence to tranquility. Later on, I'm sure that when we study the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, there are a few sutras that define what is dhyana. What is dhyana? Because when you hear the word meditation, different people have different opinions, different ideas of what is meditation. But to have a very clear understanding, especially as yoga teachers, if somebody asks, what is meditation? Then what would you say? Is it focus? Is it concentration? Is it a mental escape into an internal Disneyland for 20 minutes so that we are not tormented by the world? Is it an escape mechanism? Or are we trying to do a seated slumber? So we just fall asleep while sitting rather than lying down. So what is meditation? The precise definition of dhyana is given in the Yoga Sutras. I don't want to cover that now because it's not the moment to discuss now about the mechanics or mechanism of meditation, but I just want to point out that this also helps with the nervous system. It helps to relax the nerves, especially the central nervous system. You could say that dhyana helps to relax the central nervous system, and the pratyahara practice of Shanmukhi mudra helps to relax the peripheral nervous system. Okay, the next topic would be on the endocrine system. It's 8 o'clock now. Do you think it's a good idea to take a short break? Or okay, let's take a 4-minute break. We start sharp at 8:04.
You're going to Great America today. You're going to Great America.
Oh, yeah. You like it? Like your blog?
Scared of heights?
I
Or just...
I do like the feeling butterfly.
Variations of the Shanmukhi
Okay.
mudra. You can just do Jai there.
Adventure.
Or Brahmari.
Yeah.
And to read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika.
That's good, that should be fun.
It
Weather
says
is also
you
warm
can
down.
Yeah.
That's good, yesterday was cold.
using the internal
But
sound
still, I mean, if you're on the right
rather
it's good to
than
have.
actual humming sound. Physical sound.
If you go on high,
Yeah.
so that's, you excited?
I am.
Again, ask the same question. What is
You know, exactly.
Shanmukhi Mudra is a hand position.
Yeah.
On the right.
Shanmukhi
been in a
literally means the
while.
six-faced mudra.
Then it's more fun.
Mukha.
Yeah.
So we use each of the fingertips to close one of
Last part
the
is when
senses.
some people are
So
really
with the index finger we close, so we gently place it on the right
Yeah.
hand.
I know one of my
And then
friends
the thumb
did
we
it.
close the ear. We close the ear.
Unlike some of the rights.
Or you close the whole of the ear so that you're completely blocked. And then the middle finger, we gently place it
My
over
son,
the nostril, but not both of them. It's just a symbolic way to say that right now I'm not interested to smell
there,
it.
I'll try to push it.
And then with the ring finger and the little
I'm having
finger,
just one.
we place it above and below the lips. So that
Come over
you shut off
here, right? You
the
already do.
mouth. You're
Yeah.
not interested to
Just try it.
taste anything, nor to speak anything.
No need.
And with that kind of position, so it looks like this.
That's an age either they really enjoy or they break.
No, this is.
So you keep it for an extended period of time, and you can do like 5 rounds of
He's
Brahmani
really caught it, like.
or even pranayama.
At the time when they try to crawl down from the bed, you come to a point where you get between his feet and floor, he will not take that knee.
Don't need to make
He'll lie down there, cry over somebody, come and have it.
But it's soft so that you can feel it, but your neighbor in your class may not hear.
I'm afraid of heights.
ないと思う。
I'm like, I don't do it, I don't want to do it.
Right, so I'm not even on.
And then closing the door, get the whole thing down by hand.
Up and down, close, when breathing out as well as breathing in. It's like
交互に行くのは1個しかない。
Some people just not just want to push them back.
でも回ります。真ん中、なんかルービックキューブみたい。で、中目につけることもできる。確かに回せるからな。レゴはね、回らないですもんね。きちっとこう縦にレゴレゴランドとかでねえ、あ、そうや、レゴランドこの辺にあるんですよ。レゴランドってカリフォルニア南サンディエゴの方に行けへんけどな。で、子供ちっちゃかったりしたらみんな行くみたいで。ああ、そうでしょうね。お子さんおるとこ行ったらありますもん、絶対に。お城とか出来上がってる。レゴシリーズすごいスーパーとか行ってもいろんな種類があるよ。ああ、スター・ウォーズシリーズとか、なるほど。忍者シリーズとかな。映画まであるんですけど、お腹空いて、今日なんか朝からリラックスしてるんですよ、きっと。多分ね、きっとそうですよね。2時間ぐらいしてからのご飯ですからね。今日は体動かしてない、もう余計にあれじゃないですか。お腹すくよな。かもしれない。体動かしてるとこうね、他のこと考えてるから。昨日ってあれ聞いたの？一応聞き始めてるんですけど、終わってないです。聞けたら、じゃなくて夜なさきさんで一応ね、一応ご飯食べてる時に、あ、もうやっとに違うかいってつけたけど、遠くてカメラが音がね、聞こえへんないよってしばらくつけとったけど、聞き流しとんなって言って、なんか何別の聞きたいからって言われて止められました。私も聞いてなくて、でも結構長くやってたと思います。1時からやってたはずやけど、私がつけたらもう8時ぐらいになってて、でももう9時前ぐらいになってもまだ落ち着いてたから、すごいなーって。ベルス聞きたかったけど、そうだったけど、 私は聞こえなかったので、この先生はどこに置いちゃあかんよとか言って2人して言って、もともと分かりにくいのにって言って
ここで聞いたけど分かったかもしれない。近かったね、昨日。
あ
近かったと
そうか、なるほど、それもありますか。
昨日すごく私クリアには聞こえたよ。
そう、私もね、話分からんくせにこれいつもより分かるん違うって思って帰って聞いたら、やっぱり1時間5分じゃなくてもうちょっと聞けるん違うかと思って
なので近いの方がいいかもしれんな。
あ、やってる、また新しいやつでやってる切れるね、またでもやるところがやっぱり任せる。
Hey Ronnie, how do you jump this?
Something that I don't know. I try and
Shall we resume? Okay, we'll begin by chanting Om 3 times. So let's sit with a straight spine. Let's close our eyes. Let's take a deep breath in. Together. And let's open our eyes. So before we transition into the endocrine system, I want to mention one more very interesting aspect related to sound. Talked about Brahmari and the practice of mantra yoga and so forth. In the modern medicine, there are many practices or many interventions that use sound. How many of us have heard of this word lithotripsy? Anyone has heard of it? Lithotripsy? So lithotripsy is one procedure to deal with kidney stones. 10 years back, to deal with kidney stones, the only method was surgical intervention. Like my mom had kidney stones about 15 years back, and it became so severe that they had to do a surgery on her. But nowadays, very few cases of kidney stones need surgical intervention. So an alternate intervention that uses sound is used. It's called lithotripsy. What they do is they inject or they supply the ultrasound towards directed towards the kidney, And what it does is the vibrations due to that sound, they shake or they allow the kidney stones to break. And when it becomes small, so when it's broken down, it can actually be flushed out of the system without requiring surgery. So I mentioned this because, again, the power of sound, how it can remove the blocks. We are talking about the blocks. And one of the ways in which the blocks can be removed is by shaking them out of the system. Or when we allow the vibrations, the blocks can be disintegrated and they can be flushed out of the system. So now let's proceed to the endocrine system. And this is fascinating, especially in terms of yoga practices, because many of the modern books on yoga, they talk about the chakras as corresponding to the endocrine glands. So that is one of the line of thinking, that the chakras that we are all familiar with as yogis, they are directly, they correspond to the endocrine glands. Whether or not that connection is valid, and I don't know, but this is what many of the yoga books they present. So endocrine glands, the endocrine system and the nervous system, they share a very similar function. Both are control systems that are present in the body. So control mechanism involves this communication. We saw that the nerves, they enable communication from one part of the body to another part of the body. So from the limbs to the central nervous system and so forth for the nerves. The endocrine glands, they do a similar job. They enable communication, but the difference between the two is very significant. How are the communication in the nervous system different from the communication that takes place in the endocrine system? So when you look at the nerves, the information that it transmits is very fast. It's exceptionally fast, in the order of milliseconds. For example, when you touch something hot, you feel the sensations almost immediately. You don't feel it after 2 hours. Immediately you feel the sensation. And the response to that sensation or the response to that communication is also short-lived. In other words, when you remove the hand from that hot object, then you don't feel that anymore. So that effect was transitory. Whereas the responses in the endocrine system is slower. It has a longer time scale. Another important difference between the two is that the mechanism of communication, what is the mode by which the communication is enabled? In the nervous system, it's primarily electrical impulses. I mentioned primarily because it's a little more complicated than just electrical impulses. It's actually electrochemical impulses, but it's primarily electrical impulses. Whereas in the endocrine system, the means of communication is through chemicals, which are called exactly
Hormones.
the hormones. So the primary mode of communication in the endocrine system is the hormones. So I'm a scientist, so as a computer engineer, this is the way I look at the difference between the two systems. Let's start with the nervous system. You can think of it as a point-to-point communication, a wired communication. You can think of a long nerve as a wire. Whereas the endocrine system is more like a wireless, or you can think of it as a broadcast communication. There is one, like a base station, that broadcasts the message, and there are multiple receivers or multiple recipients. Whoever wants to receive that message can get that message. And if you want to think of some applications, like the nervous system, you can think of it as an email, a point-to-point, or a telephone call. Whereas in the endocrine system, it's more like a broadcast. So TV station. A TV station broadcasts the information in a specific channel, and whoever is interested to tune into the channel can receive that message, can receive that communication. In the modern world, you can think of it as a Twitter. So a very famous personality, you can think of someone very famous. When they broadcast a tweet, then whoever is interested to listen to that tweet can tune in, they can subscribe. So you can think of all these recipients as subscribers. And there is one person who broadcasts. So in the endocrine world, the endocrine glands, the broadcaster are the glands, the endocrine glands. And the recipients are the target organs who are interested in the communication, who are interested in receiving the hormones that are secreted by the endocrine gland. It's clear, right? Okay. So these two systems are intricately linked because responses to events sometimes require both short-term as well as a longer-term way to deal with it. For example, a response to stress, there is an immediate response as well as a more longer-term response. And so both are involved. For example, when the nervous system needs to control things in the long term, it triggers some of the glands in the endocrine system. So it communicates directly with the endocrine system, and vice versa. For example, when the adrenaline gland, when the stress hormone, the cortisol, is released, then it also stimulates the fight or flight response, the sympathetic aspect of the autonomous nervous system. So they both go hand in hand, the nervous system and the endocrine system. So what is the mechanism of this communication? How is the endocrine signaling, how does it take place? So here is the mechanics of it. So first of all, there is a secretion, a regulated secretion, and we will see why it is regulated in a few moments. So there is an endocrine gland that secretes this signaling molecule, which is called the hormone. And this hormone is actually directly placed into the bloodstream. It goes directly into the bloodstream, and because of the circulation of the blood, this hormone diffuses throughout the body. So everywhere in the blood circulation, you will see this concentration of this hormone. It diffuses throughout the body. And whatever target organs that wants to receive that communication, that wants to receive or how much concentration of the hormone is there in the bloodstream, they can listen to it with this mechanism called the receptor, which are present within the cells of the target organ. So here is a little picture for that. So this is the secreting cell, which is part of the endocrine gland, and these little dots you see are the hormones, and that could be a target cell that listens for that hormone. So when it receives that hormone, it's like a perfect adapter that connects with that hormone. And there are some other cells that don't care about the communication from this specific endocrine gland. So they don't listen to that hormone, they don't have the receptors. So only those target cells that await the communication from this gland through this hormone, they have these receptors. I hope this is clear, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the hormone only going through the blood, or it also goes through the nerves?
That's a good question. I will find out. From my understanding, it's only the bloodstream.
So lymph collects usually the dirt in the system, so it drains the kind of impurities in from the system. So hormones, I think it's just the blood.
That's my understanding as well, but I will look it up. So, what is exactly the endocrine system? It's basically a collection of glands whose function is to regulate multiple organs within the body. So these multiple organs are actually listening for communication from these glands. and the communication is managed by these hormones. And these hormones, they perform a variety of functions. So meeting the growth and the reproductive needs of the organism and respond to fluctuations within the internal environment. For example, when things in the environment change, there should be a mechanism to maintain homeostasis. In other words, equilibrium within. So regardless of what is the temperature outside, for example, whether it's cold or warm, the body has a mechanism to maintain the same temperature or within a small range. So this is an example of how equilibrium is maintained regardless of any fluctuations outside. This is managed by the endocrine system, and we will see this mechanism little later. This is using a mechanism called the negative feedback. Some of us are already familiar with what it is, so we're going to see that a little later. And then the endocrine system also manages the metabolism. It regulates the metabolism, the mood, and some of the tissue functions as well. Now, let me give an example of how this is so useful or what crucial role it plays. Let's see the growth aspect of it. You know, when the body develops from the infant to the adult, when you take the example of the two arms, they both grow at the same rate, right? It's not that the right arm grows first and then the left arm grows next. There should be some mechanism so that the growth on both sides is equal. So what is it that ensures that both limbs of the body on both sides, they grow at the same rate? And this happens because the receptors or the target organs on both sides, they receive the same communication from the endocrine gland, because when the endocrine glands secrete the hormones into the bloodstream, then the message that the right side and the left side listen to is the same identical message. You see the point, right? So because it's the same endocrine gland, in fact this growth hormone, the GH or the HGH, is secreted by the pituitary gland. So the hormone that is secreted and the target cells that listen to it, they receive the same message on both the right side and the left side. So the growth that takes place on either side is identical. So that's why you have equal left and right arms, thankfully, right? So this is one way in which the message that is communicated is same throughout the body, because the circulation of the blood, it ensures that the message is identical wherever you listen to it. Whoever is listening to it, when the message is broadcast, they hear the same message. Okay, these are some of the major endocrine glands. You have the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then the parathyroid and the thyroid glands. We have the pancreas, and then we have the endocrine glands associated with the reproductive system. And one endocrine gland that I have not shown here is the thymus, which is actually located in the chest region. And so I mentioned earlier that these glands, there is perhaps a one-to-one relationship with the chakras, and you might see that there is no heart chakra here. But you could think of the thymus gland, which I have not shown here, because it's not truly endocrine gland, it's associated more with the immune system. So that we will reserve it for some other time. I want to focus here on two of these glands, namely the thyroid and the pancreas, because one of the common conditions or common ailments that people have when they come to the yoga class is hypothyroidism. Perhaps hyperthyroidism, but hypothyroidism is more prevalent. And diabetes, which is caused by the fluctuating or the high sugar level in the blood, and mainly because of the pancreas. And we will see that mechanism. So I want to focus a little more on the thyroid and the pancreas. And before we get into that, we will talk a little bit about the negative feedback mechanism that I mentioned earlier. So, first of all, here is the list. This is just for reference. So, each of these glands and what are the names of the hormones that it secretes. So, you see that, so when we talk about the thyroid gland, we will focus on the thyroxine, which regulates the metabolism. And when we talk about the pancreas, we will specifically look into the insulin, which regulates the blood sugar level.
Where is the pineal gland located?
Pineal gland is actually like a little cone. We are going to see that in a diagram. It's just behind the hypothalamus. In fact, we are going to see that in a few slides. So these three glands, the pineal, hypothalamus and the pituitary, they function very closely, and you can think of them as the master gland. Usually when people talk about the master gland, they refer exclusively to the pituitary, but then what I read was that in the last 20 or so years, they discovered that the hypothalamus, it controls the pituitary. We will see that control mechanism a little bit later. So perhaps the name, the master gland, should apply to the hypothalamus instead. But the point is that these three glands very closely, they work together. Okay, this is the mechanism of a negative feedback. So what is it that ensures that although there are fluctuations in the environment, there is equilibrium within? And one example to see that is an air conditioning system. So regardless of the temperature outside, whether it's hot or whether it's cold, whether it's summer or whether it's winter, then you want the room temperature to be regulated in a very short range. So you don't want the same fluctuations that you see outside. And the mechanism is, as we all know, when it is too hot. So when the temperature rises, then the heating system stops, so that the room temperature decreases and then it comes back to a set point. Now, when the temperature decreases, then you trigger the heating system and the room temperature increases and it comes back to the set point. This is very familiar to all of us, right? Whether it's a heating mechanism or a cooling mechanism, there's a way to regulate it. And this depends on the negative feedback. So whatever is the, for example, when the room temperature decreases, you give the opposite feedback to it. You heat the system. So you counter the decrease in the room temperature by increasing the heat. So it's a negative feedback. And this negative feedback ensures that there is stability inside the room. The temperature is well controlled. It's maintained in a much smaller range. And the same mechanism applies in the endocrine system. In fact, there are two types of negative feedback that we see in the endocrine system. The first is the simple one, the physiological response driven negative feedback. And an example of that is the regulation of blood glucose level. So briefly, what happens here is the endocrine glands, in this case, when you talk about the glucose level, the endocrine gland that is responsible for that is the pancreas. So pancreas secretes the hormone called insulin. And when insulin is secreted, the target organs, in this case, is most of the cells in the body. It's like what is broadcast from the pancreas, it has multiple recipients. In fact, most of the cells of the body are recipients of this signal, the insulin. And the target organs, they regulate the consumption of the blood sugar based on the level of insulin. So more insulin is there, then more blood sugar is consumed. So it decreases the level of the blood sugar. Now, that is the effect. The physiological effect is that the blood sugar level is decreased. And this decrease in the blood glucose or the blood sugar will trigger the endocrine gland, in this case the pancreas, to lower the level of insulin. So you see the negative feedback happening, right? So we have a mechanism to regulate the blood sugar. When the blood sugar is too high, then more insulin is produced, so the blood sugar level comes down. So it's a mechanism by which the blood sugar level is in a small range, it doesn't go out of hand. This is one mechanism of negative feedback. There's another mechanism which is a little bit, it looks a little bit more complicated, but it uses the same principle. What happens here is that the feedback that comes into the system is not given directly to the endocrine gland, but it goes to the pituitary or the hypothalamus, or both. The feedback is given both to pituitary gland as well as the hypothalamus, but not directly to the endocrine gland that secretes that hormone. It's like somebody is giving feedback not to you but to your boss, to your manager. Now, why is this necessary? Why is a separate negative feedback system? What does it do that the first feedback system does not give? Anyone? What's the advantage of this one, the second, versus the first? The second one, by the way, it's called the endocrine axis-driven negative feedback.
If the endocrine is not working correct, it needs to be corrected at a higher level.
So what happens in this case is that the manager, in this case the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus, they can communicate not just with the current endocrine gland that secreted this hormone, but all the other endocrine glands that are under it. You see the point, right?
So the team will correct.
Exactly. So the whole team will correct for it. It's not just that one system of endocrine glands, but the entire systems of multiple endocrine glands that are managed by this pituitary gland. Their response can be changed. So you see the point, right? For example, if you are stressed, then there are multiple endocrine glands that are involved. In fact, the stress, response to stress, we are going to see how this example of axis-driven negative feedback works. So this is an example of the axis-driven negative feedback. Here, the stress hormone, which is basically the cortisol, is produced by the adrenal glands. And the negative feedback is actually provided to the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. It's not given directly to the adrenal cortex because the hypothalamus and the pituitary, they also regulate other endocrine glands in response to stress. It's not just the adrenal cortex that needs to be managed, but even other systems as well. For example, the thyroid glands, it regulates the metabolism in response to stress. It also regulates the level of insulin in response to stress. So that's why being chronically stressed will also affect the blood sugar of that person. So this is the basic mechanism. As you can see, it's a three-tiered mechanism. So this is just one tier here on the left side. Here it's a three-tiered mechanism where the feedback is given to the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Now, we have about 25 minutes. The next 3 slides, I'm not going to go too much in detail. Maybe you can read it up because there is quite a bit of material that talks about how these 3 glands, the hypothalamus, the pituitary and the pineal glands, how they work as managers in order to control the other endocrine glands. So the location of these 3 are given here. The pituitary gland, the hypothalamus and the pineal gland. In fact, one of the claims that they make in yoga is that the third eye is basically the pineal gland. So the exact mechanics of these 3, you can read up the slides for later, or maybe when we have time later today, once we complete, we'll come back to it.
So it's just right behind the eyes and everything?
Yes, not immediately behind the eyes, it's,
Little bit behind.
yes.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So if you draw a line right from your the front the soft palate
About
from here to here, that's the intersection where the pineal gland is. So straight the intersection of these two.
And you'll see some of the diagrams on the internet. I think one of the first diagrams was, even they had similar in Greek philosophy. I think Hipparchus was also created a similar diagram that we see in yogic literature as well.
where is the pituitary gland?
They're next to each
Same,
other.
around
Right here.
same
In fact, the pituitary and the hypothalamus, they are very close by to each other. So the hypothalamus, which controls the pituitary gland, so hypothalamus also secretes hormones, right? And the target organ for those hormones that are secreted by hypothalamus is actually the pituitary. Now, these two are so intricately linked that we saw that the endocrine glands are like broadcasters and you have multiple recipients. But in this case, this special case, what happens is, whatever is broadcast by the hypothalamus, whatever hormone it secretes, there is a channel, there is a vein that directly connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary. So even before the concentration of the hormone secreted by hypothalamus gets diffused, even before it gets diluted by entering the bloodstream, it is communicated to the pituitary gland. It's as if someone is standing so close to the transmitter that they receive a very loud signal. So although the signal is the same, you are standing so close to the base station or the transmitter. So that's the case with the pituitary gland. It's located very close to the hypothalamus.
Which is called reptile brain.
I don't know. Perhaps the combination of both, because one of the things about the hypothalamus and the pituitary combination is, together with the hypothalamus, they regulate all processes having to do with primitive reactions, such as response to stress, rage, etc. and survival in general. Perhaps this is what is the reptile brain.
This might be digressing a little, but when people see like flashes of light when the third eye is awakened and all that, is there any physiological connection to being close to the optic nerve?
I don't know, but the response of these glands to light is very fascinating. For example, the pineal gland, it secretes the hormone called melatonin, which is what is secreted when there is complete darkness. When it is dark, it secretes the melatonin. Now, what's interesting about this is the darkness, even if you cover the eyes with an eye mask, for example, if it's bright outside, just cover your eyes, that is insufficient. You still don't have the pineal gland secreting the melatonin. Even if the light is detected by the skin, it does not secrete the melatonin. You need complete darkness, the whole body to be in darkness in order to secrete the melatonin. So this is something interesting.
Right.
So not only do our eyes sense light, but the whole body senses light. It's an interesting mechanism. Yeah.
What is circadian rhythm?
Circadian rhythm is basically the rhythm of the night and day and how our body is in tune with nature. For example, so we saw that these three glands, the pineal, hypothalamus and pituitary, are the master glands because they secrete hormones that control the hormone production of the other glands. Now, the rhythm of night and day, the rhythm of light and darkness, the pineal gland, it is responsive to that. That's why it generates the melatonin. Now, this melatonin production also regulates the production of hormones of the other glands. So this is where the circadian rhythm kicks in. So it's not just day and night, but it's also the seasons, the variation of seasons, all these rhythms together, taken together. So you can see how these master glands help to regulate the other glands as well.
So could we also say that it's biological clock of our body?
Yes, yes. And as we all know, nowadays it's kind of disrupted because we have artificial light, and for long hours we sit in front of bright objects even in the night. So it disrupts the mechanism of the biological clock. Okay, so what are some of the practices in yoga that help to stimulate these master glands, pineal gland, hypothalamus and the pituitary? And here we see a few examples. One is the Shriram, directly stimulating these three glands, standing on the head. So it puts useful pressure on these organs. It also improves circulation to these three glands. And then you have practices to do with focus and concentration, such as Trataka. How many of us have done Trataka? So these practices also help with these three glands. And also meditation. One of the claims made in yoga is that you can directly stimulate these chakras. I mentioned chakras and not glands because that's what is given in the yogic literature. You can stimulate the chakras by directing our focus and awareness towards it. So for example, if you want to stimulate the third eye, which one of the claims is that it's the pineal gland, then take your awareness to the third eye. So you might have noticed when we do meditation, when we take our awareness to the third eye, we already feel some sensations there. You can feel some physical sensations like a tingling sensation or even a soft pulsing sensation. So that's perhaps an indication that we are stimulating the third eye, the pineal gland. And sun salutation and dharana, the focus or concentration, and even relaxation techniques help with managing these three. Okay, now let's move to thyroid gland. So thyroid gland, it's in the shape of a butterfly and it encircles the whole trachea, the windpipe. Now, one of the hormones that it generates is the thyroxine, and it regulates the rate and intensity of the metabolic process. It also produces other hormones including what's called the T3. So T4, which is the thyroxine, and the T3. And both of these hormones are intertwined with the chemistry of how iodine is utilized by the body. Now, the main reason why I want to touch on this is many people come to yoga because of hypothyroidism. It is one of the two examples of thyroid dysfunction. So hyperthyroidism is when the thyroxine levels are high, and hypothyroidism is when the thyroxine levels are less than normal. So hyperthyroidism, as you can imagine, when the thyroxine levels are higher than necessary, then the metabolic processes are in overdrive. So it causes increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased body temperature, sweating, nervousness, and so forth. Hypothyroidism, which is more common nowadays, especially you might see a lot of yoga students with this condition, hypothyroidism. It causes weight gain, weakness, depression, constipation, joint and muscle pain, etc. Now, when people experience overweight because of hypothyroidism, rather than just doing lot of movements and burning calories, it helps to stimulate the thyroid glands. So there are some postures that help directly to stimulate the thyroid glands. For example, when I was studying yoga with my teacher back in India, many people who came to him with body weight issues, excess body weight, he used to make them stay in Sarvangasana for long periods of time. Many people used to wonder, oh, in order to reduce the body weight, you need to burn calories, you need to move. But why do you ask people to remain in one of the static postures for long periods of time? The answer is, we are directly stimulating the thyroid glands here. And when thyroid glands are stimulated, then perhaps the thyroxine levels can be better managed, and maybe the metabolic levels, the metabolism can be increased, and then the weight can be easily managed. In case you're wondering, that's me doing the Sarvangasana, Halasana and the Matsyasana.
Wow.
And this is Eka, Setu Bandhasana. In all these examples, you see that we are stimulating the neck region, the thyroid. So Sarvangasana, Halasana and Matsyasana, this triad of postures. So if we do one of these postures, it's recommended to do all three. So it's like a triad of postures. So Sarvangasana and Halasana, they help to stimulate the thyroid, and the Matsyasana is the complementary pose. In other words, we have offered the bending forward of the neck. Now we need the opposite movement to counteract that. So that's the Matsyasana. And if someone is not ready to do the Sarvangasana, usually if someone is overweight already, it's difficult for them to go into one of these postures, Sarvangasana or Halasana. So what my teacher used to do was, first of all, make them do Setu Bandhasana, or it's also called the Dvipada Pidasana. So this is also a posture that stimulates the thyroid. Or you can ask them to stay in the Viparita Karani Mudra, Viparita Karani, which is a simpler form of the shoulder stand. And you can also ask them to practice Surya Namaskar for about 6 weeks, and the body becomes light or agile enough in order to go into the Sarvangasana.
So wow. So you talked about what's Jalandhara?
Jalandhara Bandha is basically, bandhas are locks, and there are 3 locks: Jalandhara Bandha, Udyana Bandha and Mooladhara Bandha. Jalandhara Bandha is when you take the chin and make contact just above the sternum, just above the chest bone, and then you breathe in Ujjayi. In fact, when you do Sarvangasana, Halasana or Setu Bandha, you get Jalandhara Bandha for free. We're already making that contact here. So there are many pranayams, especially when you do Kumbhakas, when you do retention of the breath, while doing alternate nostril breathing, or while doing Ujjayi breathing, you can offer all these 3 bandhas, or some of the 3 bandhas. You can do the Jalandhara Bandha, and it will create a little extra pressure there, which helps to stimulate the thyroid glands. So that's what is Jalandhara Bandha. Even simple neck exercises are good to stimulate the thyroid glands. So although they look very simple, just moving the head, because the thyroid glands are situated there in the neck region, it helps to stimulate them as well. Okay, now let us move to the other aspect that I wanted also to cover, is the pancreas. And pancreas is both an exocrine as well as an endocrine gland. So what is exocrine? So endocrine that we have been looking at so far. Endo means within. So whatever hormones it produces, it supplies it into the bloodstream, within the body. Whereas exocrine glands, the chemicals that it generates, the glands generate, they are driven outside of the system, either epidermally inside the skin or externally outside the body. Like sweat, for example, is an example of exocrine action. So pancreas is both an exocrine organ as well as an endocrine organ. In fact, most of the pancreas does the job of an exocrine system. 99% of the pancreatic tissue is an exocrine organ, and only 1% of pancreas is an endocrine organ, and it produces the hormone called insulin and a couple of other hormones as well, but I'd like to focus now on the insulin hormone. And it flows directly into the bloodstream, just like other endocrine glands. Now this 1% of the pancreas are tucked away in these globular modules called the islets of Langerhans. This is named after Paul Langerhans in the 19th century, who discovered them. And these islets, or little islands in the pancreas, they constitute this 1% that performs the endocrine function. There are about 1 million islets. In some books I also saw 3 million. So a few million islets distributed throughout the pancreas in a healthy adult. And they are very small. They measure 1/10 of a millimeter. And the combined mass of all these globules is just 1.5 grams. So very tiny. But they perform a very important role because they regulate the sugar level within the bloodstream. So pancreas and insulin. Pancreas secretes insulin in response to raising level of the sugar or the glucose level in the bloodstream. Now, much of that glucose is used by the brain. 75% of the blood sugar is actually consumed by the brain. And the remaining 25%, the majority is consumed by the muscle function. And the insulin levels can also be controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's a connection here with the nervous system as well, especially in response to stress. And when the sympathetic system is triggered, and when the body relaxes, when the parasympathetic system is once again coming back to balance, then we see the change in the insulin levels.
It's amazing the brain uses that much glucose.
Yes, because the brain is a major consumer of the energy in the system. And in fact, the currency through which the energy is communicated is glucose. And this is managed by the insulin. And the major consumer is the brain. So diabetes, what is diabetes? It's a group of disorders in which the glucose levels are elevated in the blood. And what is the mechanism that causes it? We are going to see that in a moment. It's a widespread disease, it's a protein disease, because the effect of elevated blood glucose levels has impact throughout the body. It's not just localized in one part of the body or in one system of the body, but it has effects all over the body. And these are the 3 polys of the diabetes: polyuria, polydipsia, and then polyphagia, which is excessive thirst, excessive eating, and excessive amount of urine. Now, the excess blood glucose comes from one of 2 mechanisms that disrupts the negative feedback. You remember the negative feedback, right? So how it works in the insulin and the blood sugar is, when the blood sugar raises, the insulin level also raises. In other words, the pancreas secrete more insulin in response to more blood sugar. But that negative feedback is disrupted, and the disruption can happen in one of 2 ways. And that's how we classify type 1 or type 2 diabetes. The type 1, which is 10 to 20% of the cases, happens when there is insufficient production of insulin to fulfill the body's needs. In other words, the pancreas, the cells of the islets of Langerhans, which are called the beta cells that produce the insulin, they become inefficient or they become tired and they don't produce sufficient insulin. And the way to deal with it is daily insulin injections. Daily insulin injections. This has to be done carefully because the daily demand for the blood glucose is different. Sometimes when they are active during the day, they require more insulin than when they are at rest for most of the time. So this level of insulin that is injected should be well managed. The second type, which is more common, is the insulin is produced correctly by the pancreas, but the recipients, they grow numb to the messages given by the pancreas. Sometimes someone very famous who tweets a lot, we know what they're going to say, so we just become numb to them, right? So we ignore whatever they say. So like that, the receptors or the target organs, they grow numb. The technical term is the insulin resistance. So insulin resistance builds up, so that in response to more insulin, more blood sugar is not consumed. So the blood sugar is still in the circulation. So the sugar level does not come down in response to increased insulin levels. So that's what the type 2 diabetes is. So you see the difference between them, right? But the effect is the same. The effect is, in both cases, you have more blood sugar and the negative feedback is disrupted.
I have a question on that. So, if the insulin level is normal, why have the cells become progressively less?
Because in response to increased blood sugar, the pancreas keeps elevating the level of insulin more and more. And when the whole bloodstream is bombarded with higher and higher concentrations of insulin, then basically the receptors don't care whether it goes higher. So it's a problem.
It seems like a chicken and egg problem, right? Which one starts first? Is it?
Yeah, in fact, which one starts first, that's what differentiates between the type 1 and type 2. So in type 1, there is insufficient insulin because the pancreas has been disrupted. Whereas in type 2, the functioning of the pancreas is okay because it still produces insulin. But the receptors, they become numb to the level of insulin in the bloodstream.
So it seems more like a cellular level through the body.
Exactly,
throughout the body. While the other one seems to be more isolated.
Focused on the pancreas. Yeah.
Does the pancreas stop, or does it just keep producing insulin in type 2?
In type 2, it keeps producing insulin. It just keeps producing insulin.
So the levels are highly...
Yeah, it becomes so high that even with that high concentration of insulin, it's not able to regulate the blood sugar levels. Now, I would highly recommend that you read this book. This is published by Vyasa. Yoga for Diabetes. It goes into much more detail about how the practices in yoga can help bring relief from diabetes. This is published, in fact it's available here through Yoga Bharati. I purchased my book here from Yoga Bharati.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
I have a question. So, are there studies done to see people before and after doing yoga? Is that what even this book would cover, or?
I think the book covers a little bit, but the same authors, they have published numerous papers in NIMHANS.
Oh, okay.
So, Dr. Nagaratna and Dr. H.R. Nagendra, I'm sure many of you have seen them. So they have published many papers studying the effect of yoga on a controlled group of diabetes patients.
In fact, we did some online session with Dr. Nagaratna on diabetes and diabetes disease. And there are yoga for different ailments books. Diabetes is one of them.
Yes, in fact there is one book on yoga for asthma, one book on yoga for managing high blood pressure and so forth. In fact, the whole series of books is very insightful. In this book you will find much more than what we are covering in these few slides. In fact, when I was in Houston, we had a 14-day workshop where Dr. Nagendra, he came and he conducted this yoga for diabetes patients. And at the end of it, we had about 50 people in that workshop, and they recorded before and after the level of the blood sugar, and many people saw significant change. They were very impressed with the effect of yoga in just 14 days. So that was quite remarkable.
So once they do these yoga practices for some time, does the system comes back to normal and then just goes on its own, or they have to continue?
It's a good question. That was not studied in that 14-day, but I think it's better to keep that as part of the daily practice than just a one-time thing. And then, because when we revert back to our original lifestyle, then we create the same conditions that brought the diabetes in the first place. In fact, type 2 diabetes especially, one of the main causes is the sedentary lifestyle and stress, and also consuming high glycemic foods, high sugar foods. So they directly trigger the onset of type 2 diabetes. And in yoga and Ayurvedic literature, they talk about diabetes as the effect of imbalance in kapha. When there is too much kapha in the system, when the vikriti of kapha exceeds the prakriti of kapha, then it manifests in the body as diabetes. What is vikriti, what is kapha? I think at a later time when we discuss Ayurveda, it might become clear. But if you already studied Ayurveda, then it's basically a kapha disorder. So what are some of the postures, what are some of the practices in yoga that can help with stimulating the pancreas? So one of the best postures to bring relief is spinal twists. So we see two examples here, the Ardha Matsyendrasana, and there are many versions of Jatara Parivritti, which is the lying down spinal twist. So what you see here is the simple version. There are other versions where you keep both legs straight, and there are versions where you take one leg to the side or even both legs to the sides, and those are extremely beneficial for diabetes patients. And Paschimottanasana, and then Mayurasana. Mayurasana is described in the classic yoga text. It talks about Mayurasana as providing health benefit to all the major organs of the digestive system, including the pancreas. And it says in Hatha Yoga Pratipika, for example, that the digestive organs become so strong that you can even consume a stone and it will be digested. Don't do it at home, but that's what it says in some of the classic yoga texts. They make tall claims like that. And it's good that we have proper research, evidence-based research in order to study these practices as well.
So are you doing the Mayurasana there in the picture?
These three are me. This was me when I didn't have grey hair. And this is my wife Eka. Jagara Parivritti and Dhanurasana. Dhanurasana also provides useful pressure to the digestive organs and stimulates the pancreas as well.
So this is only for the type 1, right? Because they produce the insulin?
For both.
Okay.
For both. Because exercise in general helps with type 2. Whatever exercise you do. In fact, sun salutation is also a good way because whatever can reduce kapha in the system is beneficial. And one of the best ways to reduce kapha is Kapalabhati. If you read the Hatha Yoga Pratipika, it says excess kapha. If people have excess kapha, they have to do Kapalabhati every day. That's what it says. So Kapalabhati, Agnisara, Naulikriya and Uddiyana Bandha, all these practices help to stimulate or put useful pressure in the visceral organs, including the pancreas. So, in closing, Naulikriya is basically, once you apply Uddiyana Bandha, you apply Uddiyana Bandha after exhaling fully, and then you cave the stomach inside, and then move you can see a YouTube video on YouTube, just search for Naulikriya, and then you move the, I don't know how to describe it, but it's a way to massage the large intestine, actually move it in circles. I'm sure you might have seen it before. So that practice is called Naulikriya. In fact, in Houston, there's a very famous cancer research institute, MD Anderson Cancer Center. And Svyasa had a collaborative program with the Cancer Institute, MD Anderson. And they studied the effect of yoga practices on colon cancer. And they found that the best practice was Naulikriya. Naulikriya, if they do it every day, it brought so much relief for the patients in that control group. So these are all very powerful practices.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Agnisara and Nauli there is a sum of difference or is it totally different?
Oh, they're totally different. In Agnisara, You breathe out fully, hold the breath, and move the navel in and out as if you're mimicking the movements of Kapalabhati.
And that noise is.
Exactly. So they are very different. So with that, we conclude for today. I just want to mention one more time that yoga is much more than just stretching. It's more than just some effect on the joints of the body or the skeletal muscles. There's much more that's going on internally. And it has direct effect. From today's presentation, we saw that we can even control the nervous system and the endocrine system. So it has a lasting effect on the body. It goes into the subtler aspects beyond the musculoskeletal system. So from next week, what we're going to do is, we're going to cover some of the basics of musculoskeletal anatomy. What are the joints, what are the muscles, and some of the ways in which we can look at the exercise. What is an isometric exercise, isotonic exercise, and how to refer to different parts of the body, the distal part, the medial part, the extremal part, so forth. We will learn all these terms that will help us in our musculoskeletal anatomy. So thank you for your enthusiasm, and we will continue from where we left off. Next week we are going to be in the musculoskeletal anatomy. Thank you.
So, let's take a breakfast break.